Have you ever made someone a promise you were certain you could keep, right up until the morning you discovered you couldn't? Clare Doyle was 6 minutes from breaking one. The platform at Harmon's Ford was empty except for her, a porter loading crates of dressings bound north, and an engine already hissing steam into the cold October air. Frost had settled on the boards overnight. Her breath came out in small white clouds. She watched instead of watching the clock above the ticket window, because the clock told her what she already knew. She had promised him she would never leave without saying goodbye. She was about to leave without saying goodbye. Her bag held everything she now owned, which was less than what she'd owned 6 months earlier, and somehow felt like more. The conductor called the 5-minute warning. Clare Doyle, which was not, in fact, her name, looked one last time down the empty road toward the hospital. No one was coming. To understand how she got here, you have to go back to the morning she first arrived at Harmon's Ford, carrying a dead woman's papers and a name that wasn't hers. 6 months earlier. The papers said Clare Doyle, born Baltimore, 26 years of age, trained under Sister Agnes at St. Vincent's. The woman holding those papers in the mud outside the Harmon's Ford Field Hospital was Sarah Whitfield, 24, and she had never once set foot inside St. Vincent's. Her cousin Claire had died of typhoid the previous spring. Sarah had buried her, kept her papers out of some instinct she couldn't name at the time. The purpose of those papers became clear to her 3 weeks before her own wedding, to a man twice her age, in a church her father had already chosen. Judge Josiah Pruitt held her father's debts, all of them. He had proposed a settlement requiring no money at all, only Sarah, and soon. Her father had called it generous. Sarah had called it nothing at all, because by the time anyone thought to ask her opinion, she was already gone. She had carried the name Clare Doyle for 11 days when she walked into Dr. Foss's field hospital, a converted church, pews stacked against the walls, carbolic soap losing its argument against everything worse. Dr. Foss looked at her papers for exactly 4 seconds and hired her on the spot. Field hospitals in October of 1864 did not have the luxury of scrutiny. Dr. Foss asked if she had done this kind of work before.
I have.
He said that was more confidence than most gave him, then sent her to the East Ward. They were short 2 hands already. A man changing dressings in the corner did not look up when she came in. Tall, dark-haired, moving with the careful economy of someone whose hands no longer needed instruction from his mind. He said nothing to the patient. He said nothing to Dr. Foss. He said nothing to her. An orderly named Whitcomb leaned toward her low. Whitcomb told her that was Elias, that he didn't talk, and that it was best not to ask why. She hadn't planned to ask why. She had planned since April not to ask anyone anything they might remember answering. But she watched the patient's shoulders loosen under his hands, the particular way shoulders loosen for someone they trust, and found herself curious despite every resolution she'd made about curiosity being a luxury. Word came before noon. A column of wounded was moving toward Harmon's Ford from a skirmish 2 days east, 40 men, perhaps more. Dr. Foss looked at his short-staffed hospital and then at the new nurse standing in his doorway with a dead woman's name. Dr. Foss called for Miss Doyle and said he hoped St. Vincent's had taught her to work fast. It hadn't. Nothing had. She would learn fast instead, starting that same evening whether she was ready or not. Her first afternoon she was set to rolling bandages beside Elias, who worked as though she wasn't in the room at all, until she rolled one badly enough that it unraveled across the floor between them. He picked it up, re-rolled it in 4 seconds without a word, and set it back in the basket.
I can learn to do it properly. You needn't do it for me.
He looked at her then, the first time he had directly, since she'd arrived.
I know you can. I did it because it was faster, not because I doubted you.
It was the longest sentence she'd heard him speak to anyone that day. She filed the distinction away faster, not doubt, the way she was learning to file away every small thing about him that didn't match what Whitcomb had warned her to expect. By the end of her first week, she could set a splint without flinching, mix a fever draft from memory, and recognize the particular quiet Elias fell into before a patient he'd grown attached to took a turn for the worse. She never once saw him cry. She saw him leave the room twice and knew exactly what those absences meant. They came at dusk, 43 of them on wagons and litters and the backs of men who could still walk, and the church filled with a sound worse than screaming, pain being endured rather than voiced. Clare worked without stopping to think, which turned out to be the only way to work at all. She cut away uniforms stiff with dried blood. She held men's hands while bones were set. A boy no older than 17 gripped her wrist while Dr. Foss worked on his leg and would not let go until it was over. The soldier begged her not to let Dr. Foss take the leg.
I'm right here. Look at me. Not at him.
He kept the leg. She would not learn his name until 3 days later, when he thanked her by it, hers, the false one, which by then had started to feel almost like her own. Elias worked beside her, each motion measured, nothing wasted. She reached for a bandage roll and found it already in his hand. He needed a second pair of hands to hold a man still, and she was simply there, already bracing.
Hold here. Don't let him twist.
I have him.
It was not conversation. It was something that did the work of conversation without any of the words. Near midnight, the worst of it passed. Clare sat on an overturned crate outside, hands shaking now that there was nothing left to keep them steady for. Elias came out with 2 cups of coffee that tasted mostly of chicory, and sat beside her uninvited, the way he did most things. He handed her one. She took it.
Does it get easier?
No, you just get faster at the parts that don't matter, so you have more left for the parts that do.
She turned the cup in her hands and decided that was, so far, the truest thing anyone at Harmon's Ford had told her. They sat in a silence that felt, to her surprise, entirely comfortable, the first silence in 6 months that hadn't felt like something to manage. 3 days later, a man in a gray traveling coat rode into Harmon's Ford. He asked after a young woman, brown hair, gray eyes, believed to be traveling under a false name. He gave his name as Hale and said he represented a family concerned for a runaway relation's welfare. Clare was folding linens when Whitcomb told her a stranger was asking questions in the yard. She did not stop folding. Her hands had learned exactly how to look occupied while her mind ran elsewhere. Whitcomb said the stranger was looking for a runaway relation and that he didn't much like the look of him.
Neither do I, and I haven't even seen his face yet.
She watched through the window as Hale spoke to Dr. Foss, who shook his head, gestured at the chaos of the hospital, said something that made Hale's mouth tighten. Hale looked toward the building once, a long assessing look before mounting his horse and riding toward the town instead of away from it. He had not left Harmon's Ford, he had simply stopped asking in the yard. That Clare understood was considerably worse. If you have ever spent a week waiting for a knock, watching everyone who passes a little too closely, you know the particular exhaustion Clare carried through the days that followed. Sleep doesn't touch it. She noticed that Elias had begun leaving small things where she'd find them. A cloth folded exactly the way she preferred, sat at her station before her shift began. Once a note in careful handwriting, "You did well Tuesday." Foss noticed too. She kept the note. She wasn't sure why, except that no one had told her she'd done well at anything in longer than she wanted to count. She found him restocking shelves one evening and, surprising herself, held the note out toward him.
Did you mean this? Or were you just being kind?
I don't say things I don't mean. It's part of why I don't say very many of them.
She tucked the note back into her apron and didn't ask him anything else that night, though she thought about the answer longer than she probably should have. The following Sunday, the one slow morning the hospital allowed itself, Elias walked to the creek to fetch water and found Sarah already there, sleeves rolled, boots off, feet in the cold shallows despite the season.
You'll catch your death.
I've survived worse than cold water this year, Mr. Carver.
He set down his buckets and, after a moment's visible deliberation, sat on the bank beside her and removed his own boots. Neither of them said anything for a while. The creek moved around their ankles, indifferent to debts and judges and dead women's papers, and for a few minutes Sarah allowed herself to simply be a person sitting by water on a Sunday.
Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if the war had gone differently? If Daniel had lived?
Every day. Usually farming. He wanted the two of us to take over our father's land together.
Would you have been happy?
I think so. I think I'd have been an entirely different man than the one sitting here.
She considered that, the strange arithmetic of grief, how it had made him quiet enough to actually listen when she needed listening to, and asked herself whether she'd have found him at all in a life where he'd never needed to learn silence so thoroughly.
I'm not sorry to have met this version of you, even knowing what it cost.
He looked at her for a long moment, water still moving over both their feet.
Neither am I, which feels like a strange thing to admit out loud.
It was the closest either of them had come so far to saying the thing neither had yet found the courage to name directly. Hale returned on a Thursday, walking directly into the hospital, under the pretense of a cut on his hand that needed no real attention. He sat while Elias cleaned a wound that didn't need cleaning, his eyes moving around the room cataloging. They landed on Clare.
You've an unusual accent for a Baltimore girl, Miss Doyle.
Baltimore's a large city, Mr. Hale. It contains a great many accents.
I'm told the family I'm looking for has connections south of here. A father with debts, a judge grown impatient waiting for a wedding that never happened.
That sounds like a very unfortunate family. I hope you find them.
Elias, who had said nothing through the exchange, finished bandaging a hand that had never needed bandaging and stepped calmly into the space between Hale's chair and Clare. It was not dramatic. It looked like a man simply going about his work, but Hale's line of sight to her was gone. Hale's fingers closed once around the edge of the chair, hard enough to whiten the knuckles. When he released it, the scrape of wood across the floor was the only ugly sound in the ward. After a moment, Hale stood, thanked them both with the courtesy of a man who has decided a room has nothing more to give him today, and left. Clare exhaled. She had not realized she'd stopped breathing.
You should sit down.
In all their days of working 12 feet apart, she had rarely heard him spend a sentence where a nod would do. She sat because her legs had stopped entirely trusting her.
Thank you.
For the chair, or the rest of it?
There was nothing accusatory in the question. It sat between them the way his silences usually did, patient, willing to wait as long as it took for an honest answer.
Both.
He nodded once, as if that settled something, and went back to his patience. If you're already hoping Elias keeps standing between her and that door, leave a like or tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps this kind of slow burn historical romance find the people who stay for quiet promises and last-minute trains. The storm came 4 nights later, the kind of October storm that turns a Maryland road into a river and strips half a church roof off in an hour. Dr. Foss had ridden to the county seat for supplies and hadn't returned before the roads went. Whitcomb and the other orderlies scattered to secure the outbuildings. By 10 o'clock, Clare and Elias were the only two left inside, tending a soldier named Private Ames, whose fever had spiked past anything either of them had the authority to treat alone.
We can't keep him under the leak. Help me move the cot.
Where? Everything's wet through.
The vestry. It's small, but it's dry.
Rain came through the damaged roof in a steady sheet. They moved Ames's cot twice, then a third time into the vestry, the only dry corner left, barely large enough for the cot and the two of them. They worked through the night in that narrow space. Their shoulders brushed each time one of them reached for the basin. She could hear him breathing when the wind dropped between gusts. Ames's fever broke a little after 3 in the morning. They sat afterward on the floor, backs against the wall, too tired to stand, listening to the storm ease into ordinary rain.
My brother died in a room smaller than this one.
Clare turned her head. He was looking at the ceiling, not at her. The rain on the church roof seemed to pull another room over this one, a room made of canvas, smoke, trampled grass, and lantern light. Antietam, 2 years and 1 month earlier, Elias Carver had been kneeling in mud that was no longer only mud, one hand pressed hard against his brother's side while rainwater ran off the tent ridge and struck the ground in steady drops. Daniel asked him to tell their mother he had kept the good watch.
You'll tell her yourself.
Daniel had tried to laugh at that, and the effort had frightened Elias more than the blood. Outside the tent, men called for surgeons who could not be in 6 places at once. Inside it, Elias found himself saying every proper thing men say to the dying, and hearing each one fail before it reached his brother's face. Then Daniel said his name, Eli. That was all. His brother's hand tightened once around his sleeve, then loosened with a quiet so complete that the battlefield seemed, for one impossible second, to have gone silent around it. Elias had still been holding him when a surgeon drew the blanket up. He remembered thinking he should say something final, something worthy of the person leaving. Nothing came. Back in the vestry, the rain had softened to a steady tapping. Elias's hands were still braced on his knees, as if some part of him had never stopped kneeling in that tent.
Afterward, I found I had nothing left worth saying to anyone else.
Clare did not offer him comfort. She had learned from him that comfort offered too quickly is often just a way of ending a moment before it costs anything.
What was his name?
Something shifted in his face, surprise, she thought, at being asked the one question no one else had thought to ask.
Daniel.
Daniel Carver.
You're the first person in 2 years who said his name back to me instead of mine.
The rain kept falling, ordinary now, almost gentle. Clare found she was closer to him than the width of the room required, and that she had not moved there by accident.
My name isn't Doyle.
The words came out before she decided to say them, which was, she'd think later, exactly how the truest things always arrived.
I know.
You know?
Doyle women don't flinch at Baltimore questions, and you flinched at 2 of them these past weeks. I stopped needing your real name to know you were carrying somebody else's.
Why didn't you say anything?
It wasn't mine to ask for. A person's reasons for hiding are their own business until they choose to hand them over.
She had expected, if this moment ever came, to feel exposed. Instead, she felt something closer to relief, the relief of being known and not yet abandoned for it.
Sarah. My name is Sarah Whitfield.
He said it once, quietly, the way he'd said his brother's name, testing whether the shape of it fit in his mouth.
Sarah.
Neither of them said anything else for a long moment. The storm had nearly passed. Somewhere outside, a door banged once and went still.
What is it you're running from? Sarah Whitfield?
She told him. Not all of it. The shape of it first. The debt, the judge, the wedding she'd left 3 weeks before it would have made her someone's possession by law. He listened patiently, never once interrupting to reassure her it would be fine, because he knew better than most that it might not be.
The man asking questions? Hale.
He works for the judge.
Then he'll keep coming back until he's certain. Once he's certain, he'll send word south.
I know.
I'm not going to let that happen without a fight, Sarah. I want you to know that whatever else comes of tonight.
It was the most words he had strung together in her hearing since she'd arrived at Harmon's Ford. She felt, hearing them, that something between them had shifted permanently, over a soldier's fever and a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 6 months. A letter reached her 10 days later, forwarded twice before it found Harmon's Ford, in her mother's careful hand. Sarah read it behind the supply room while Whitcomb unloaded a crate of chloroform bottles on the other side of the wall. Her mother wrote of weather first, and a neighbor's illness, and then of the thing that had made her hand shake hard enough to blot the page. The judge had come to the house again. He had asked after Sarah by name, her name, not Clare Doyle's. Sarah folded the letter once, then twice. Instead of crying, she moved. She crossed the yard in the cold with the page hidden in her sleeve, went straight to the little ledger where Dr. Foss kept staff assignments, and found the line where Clare Doyle had been written in neat black ink. For a moment her finger rested on that borrowed name, as if pressure alone could keep it from betraying her. Then she shut the ledger, carried it to Dr. Foss's locked cabinet, and stood there with the key ring in her hand, understanding that paper could become a trap as surely as any locked room. Elias found her not collapsed behind the supply room, but kneeling beside the cabinet, with every staff roster spread across the floor around her.
Sarah?
It was her real name, spoken low enough that no one else could hear it, and it steadied her more than any question would have.
My mother says the judge knows it now. Not Doyle? Mine.
Elias looked from her face to the rosters. He did not ask permission. He gathered the loose pages by date, separated the active lists from the old ones, and slid the most dangerous sheet beneath his coat.
Hale isn't guessing anymore. He's confirming.
She nodded once.
Then we stopped giving paper the chance to help him.
He locked the cabinet, put the key back exactly where Foss kept it, and started toward the office with the roster already hidden against his chest. Sarah realized this time without needing the word for it, that some kinds of comfort look like action instead of standing still. Hale did not wait long. A wounded man transferred through Harmon's Ford the following week, a Marylander from a county 2 days south, and mentioned idly, while his wounds were dressed, a scandal back home. A judge's bride who'd vanished before the wedding, last seen heading north with a dead cousin's papers. He mentioned it to the wrong nurse. Sarah stood 3 feet away, changing a different man's bandages, and heard every word land like a stone dropped into still water. Hale heard it too. He had never stopped drinking in the town's one tavern most evenings, listening exactly for this kind of careless talk. He came to the hospital the next morning with a telegram folded in his coat pocket and the calm of a man who no longer needed to ask questions.
Miss Whitfield?
She did not turn immediately. She finished tying off the bandage in her hands first. Some part of her knew the next few minutes would matter, and wanted them to begin from composure rather than panic. When she turned, Hale was watching her with the expression of a man collecting a debt he'd been owed for some time. He held out a folded paper.
The judge wired Dr. Foss directly, in case you doubted his patience was running out. I imagine the doctor burned it rather than show you, so I brought my own copy.
I'm not going back.
That isn't the offer on the table. You'll come back to face the debt your father left, or it gets settled through the courts, through the papers you've been carrying, through whatever a judge decides is appropriate for fraud.
Elias appeared in the doorway. He had heard enough to understand the shape of the threat and crossed the room fast, none of his usual economy in it.
You'll leave, Mr. Hale.
This isn't your affair, soldier.
It is precisely my affair. I'm asking you once, civilly, to leave this hospital.
Hale looked between them, and something in his expression recalculated. He had come expecting a frightened girl alone. He had not accounted for a man standing between her and the door.
I'll be at the tavern until Sunday. After that, I write to the judge, with or without her cooperation.
He left. The hospital settled back into its ordinary noise, but nothing in the room felt ordinary anymore. Elias found Dr. Foss in his office within the hour, and closed the door behind him, a thing he almost never did.
That man means to send her back to a forced marriage and a debt that isn't hers to pay.
Dr. Foss said he had gathered as much from the look on Hale's face leaving there.
I want to get her out before Sunday, quietly, somewhere he can't easily follow.
Dr. Foss studied him for a long moment, the particular look of a man reconsidering everything he thought he understood about someone he'd worked beside for 2 years. Dr. Foss observed that Elias had said more to him in the last minute than in the last 6 months combined.
Some things are worth the words.
Foss didn't smile, exactly, but something in his face eased. Foss told him he would see what he could arrange, and warned him to say nothing to her yet. A plan half-finished only frightened people twice. That same afternoon, orders arrived for Dr. Foss. The front had shifted. Harmon's Ford's hospital would consolidate with a larger facility 2 counties north within the week. Records would transfer. Staff rosters would be recopied for the larger hospital. The sheet Elias had taken could slow a search, but it could not stop a new clerk from writing Clare Doyle into a ledger with no reason to protect her. Sarah knew, standing in the yard with the transfer order in her hands, that she had perhaps 4 days left before her false name stopped being useful to anyone, including herself.
You're thinking about leaving before the transfer?
I have to. If my name goes on that transfer roster, Hale has everything he needs without lifting a finger.
Then leave properly, not running in the night like something you did wrong.
What would you call it instead?
He took her hand, a gesture he hadn't made before, careful, deliberate, entirely unlike the wordless efficiency they'd built over 6 months.
I'd call it a woman going somewhere safer. with someone who intends to know exactly when she leaves and where.
She looked at their hands together, then at his face, and found the stillness she'd carried since April finally, very slightly, beginning to loosen.
Promise me something.
Anything.
Whatever happens between now and the day I go, don't let me leave without saying goodbye. I've had enough of people deciding an ending on my behalf without telling me first.
I promise.
It was, she'd think later, an easy promise for him to make, and an almost impossible one for either of them to keep, given everything still to come in the 4 days remaining. The 4 days went the way such days generally do, too fast in memory, unbearably slow while living them. Sarah wrote a letter she never sent. Elias spoke with Dr. Foss privately, twice, about something he wouldn't tell her yet. Hale kept to the tavern, watching the hospital from a distance. On the first night, Sarah went to the supply room for lamp oil and found the outer latch tied shut with a strip of black ribbon. For one breath, she was a girl again in her father's hall, hearing a key turn on the other side of a door. Then she set the lamp down, took the small dressing knife from her apron, and sawed through the ribbon with hands that shook only after the last strand gave way. A folded paper waited just inside on the floor, no signature, Hale's hand unmistakable in its careful, unhurried print. 3 days, it read. Then a letter goes south whether you've packed or not. Sarah showed it to no one. She burned it in the stove before the ink had even fully dried, and told herself the burning counted as an answer, even if he'd never see it. Elias noticed anyway. He noticed most things about her by then, whether she showed him or not.
Something's changed since this morning.
Nothing worth repeating.
I didn't ask if it was worth repeating. I asked if something had changed.
She almost told him about the note. She decided instead that she had one thing left in this arrangement that was entirely her own to carry, and she intended to carry it a little longer.
Ask me again on Thursday.
I will.
On the second night, Sarah found Elias on the church steps, looking at nothing in particular, and sat beside him the way he'd once sat beside her.
You've been disappearing at odd hours.
Arranging things.
What kind of things?
The kind I'd rather show you than explain badly.
She let it go that night, because there was something in the set of his shoulders that told her pressing wouldn't speed anything up, only make him retreat further into the silence he'd spent 6 months climbing out of. Whitcomb, who noticed everything and said little about most of it, cornered Elias near the woodpile that same evening. Whitcomb said Elias was sending letters, 3 of them that week by his count.
Since when do you count my letters, Whitcomb?
Whitcomb said he'd started counting when Elias began writing them like a man with somewhere to be. Whatever it was, he hoped it worked. Elias didn't answer that directly, but he didn't deny it either, and Whitcomb took the silence for what it was worth and went back to his own work, satisfied enough with an answer that wasn't quite one. On the third night, Dr. Foss called her into his office and told her plainly that he'd arranged a seat on the northbound train for the following dawn, before the transfer order took effect, before the roster reached anyone's hands but his own. Dr. Foss admitted he had suspected for some time that Clare Doyle wasn't entirely who her papers claimed, and had decided months ago it wasn't a physician's business to ask. She thanked him. He waved it off the way men like him waved off most things they'd rather not be thanked for. He told her the train left at first light, and that he'd get there early if he were her. She did not sleep that night. She packed the little she owned, wrote nothing to Elias because she trusted entirely that he'd be there in the morning as promised. Near midnight, Whitcomb found her in the supply room and pressed a small parcel of bread and dried meat into her hands and said nothing else about it. Whitcomb said it was for the journey, doctor's orders officially, his own idea unofficially.
Thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. For everything, not just the bread.
Whitcomb told her to go on before he decided to make a speech about it. She lay awake afterward, counting the hours until the sky began, finally, to gray. What she did not know, what none of them knew until it happened, was that Private Ames took a sudden and dangerous turn an hour before dawn. His wound had gone bad overnight, quietly, the way such things sometimes do. Elias was the only one awake to hear him.
Easy.
Stay with me, Ames. I've got you.
He could have woken someone else. He told himself, running down the church aisle with his bag already in hand, that there wasn't time to find out whether anyone else would wake fast enough. He chose the patient. He believed, in the panic of the moment, that he had perhaps 20 minutes to spare before the train, and that 20 minutes would be enough for both. He was wrong by 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes are the ones Sarah Whitfield was standing inside when we first found her, on an empty platform, bag in hand, watching an empty road. 6 minutes from a train pulling out without the one person she'd made promise not to let her leave alone. The conductor called all aboard for the northbound. Final call. Sarah picked up her bag. A part of her, the part that had spent 6 months learning to expect endings before they were offered, had already begun composing the version of this morning she'd carry forward. The one where she left alone, because leaving alone was the thing she knew how to survive. She looked once more down the empty road and told herself that a promise broken by circumstance was not the same as a promise broken by choice. She'd have to be the one to believe that, because there was no one left on the platform to tell her so. She had one foot on the train step when she heard it. Not footsteps first, her own name, shouted from somewhere past the ticket window in a voice that had spoken perhaps 40 words to her in all the months she'd known him, and was now spending several at once.
Sarah?
She turned. He was running down the platform, coat unbuttoned, blood on his sleeve that wasn't his own. Ames would live, she'd learn later, and an expression she had never once seen him wear in 6 months of careful, contained silence. The conductor called for the last passengers. Elias reached her with perhaps 90 seconds to spare, breathing hard, and stopped a foot away as though even now, at the very edge of losing her, some part of him needed permission to close the last distance.
I told you I'd be here.
You very nearly weren't.
Ames started bleeding an hour before dawn. I had a choice between breaking a promise to a dying man or breaking one to you. I've spent every second since making my peace with the second one because I have to believe you'd understand it wasn't a choice against you.
The whistle sounded, long and final.
Elias?
I'm not finished. I've said perhaps 4 sentences a week to another living soul for 2 years, and I've used most of a year's worth on you in the last 10 minutes. Let me finish while I still have the nerve for it.
She waited. Around them, the last passengers hurried past, and none of it seemed to reach either of them.
I'm not asking you to stay. Hale will still be at that tavern tomorrow, and the judge doesn't stop being a threat because I've decided I love you. I'm asking you to let me come with you. Foss released me this morning. That's what those 2 conversations were, if you're wondering. I'll find work wherever the train stops. I'd rather be a stranger in a new town beside you than a familiar face in this one without you.
Sarah Whitfield had spent 6 months learning exactly how much a promise could cost the person keeping it, and exactly how rare it was to meet someone who paid that cost without being asked twice.
You're certain?
I buried the last person I loved without getting to say a single thing I meant to say to him. I'm not making that mistake twice. Not with you. Not while there's still a train I can catch.
The doors began to close along the platform. She took his hand. Not carefully this time, not deliberately, but the way you reach for something you've already decided you're keeping. He kissed her there on the platform, quickly, imperfectly, the way a man kisses someone when he has 90 seconds and has already spent most of them talking. And she kissed him back with everything 6 months of careful stillness had been saving up without her permission.
Then you'd better hurry, Mr. Carver. I'm not waiting for you twice in one morning.
They boarded together with 4 seconds to spare. The train pulled out of Harmon's Ford into a sky just beginning to turn the color of the inside of a shell. 2 counties south, a man named Hale would wake in a tavern to discover the girl he'd been so patient about had already crossed a state line he had no authority to follow her over. Dr. Foss stood on the platform until the train was out of sight, then went back to a hospital, 1 nurse and 1 orderly short, and considered, not for the first time, that some losses were worth exactly what they cost. I've made promises I wasn't certain I could keep, and broken at least one of them for reasons that felt right at the time and never stopped costing me afterward. I don't know that there's a clean way through that kind of choice. I only know the people worth keeping are usually the ones who come running anyway. 4 minutes late, someone else's blood on their sleeve, every intention of explaining themselves before the door closes. Has someone ever shown up for you at the very last possible moment, later than they should have, but still in time? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one, and it genuinely helps this kind of story find the people who need it.